you got interested with your company looking at, for example, the GI system, the nervous system, and I wanted to ask specifically what the brain-gut connection is, and more specifically, do you think there's like in the gut microbiome, there's an interaction between the microbes that are in the gut, the enteric nervous system, and the central nervous system?
So yes, so there are a bunch of questions in there. So let's start. Well, I'll start, and then if I forget something, just
Go ahead.
so yes, they are obviously all interrelated. My interest in this comes both from personal experience. So I suffer from a variety of gut issues. Always have, which is frustrating. So I have IBS. So there's a sort of a latent personal interest.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to talking about the interrelatedness of the gut to other areas of health, I mean, think about it logically. The gut is the center of everything, right?
Yeah.
How do we fuel the body? We fuel the body with food.
Mm-hmm.
That food, of course, has to go through the gut, and
Mm-hmm.
all nutrients are converted into the various, we call them metabolites, but let's say markers, compounds, nutrients that fuel all the other systems' health. I mean, down to even your hair.
Yeah.
I mean, things that you eat get converted into the cells that make up your hair, your nails, your eyeballs, your liver, right? Where does it come from? It doesn't magically just appear. It comes from something. So the gut is just so critical because it's that center point from
Mm-hmm.
everything. Everything goes through it, and then is
Yeah.
through it, and then is shuttled out to other areas of health. Um, the enteric, so the enteric nervous system it's the name that is given to the connection between the brain and the gut.
Mm-hmm.
There is literally a nerve that runs between your brain and your gut
Mm-hmm.
that allows the two to communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
So when we say, I feel anxiety, like let's say I'm stressed in my head and why is it that I feel butterflies in my stomach? Why is it that I maybe, when I get nervous, I suddenly have to go to the bathroom more? Why? Well, because of the enteric nervous system, because of that nerve, the vagus nerve that connects the brain to the gut, your brain is stressed and it's connected to the gut. So that increased movement is causing your gut to do more peristalsis, which is causing you to go to the bathroom more. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, they're very intimately connected. And then it works the other way too. So if you're, constipated chronically in the gut, well, yeah, that's going to stress you out.
Yeah.
How unpleasant is that?
Yeah.
So, again, there's just a tremendous amount of research that talks about, many of these gut type conditions
Mm-hmm.
and the importance of anxiety and depression and stress and emotional disturbance and how, the two are very much intimately connected. It was interesting. I was reading an article recently on, it's called the brain gut lung access and its relevance now to COVID and how, these things are all connected. So I had heard about it, but it was just really fascinating that, the gut again is connected to just literally everything.
Yeah. And for as far as the microbes go in the gut, how do you think they got there? Do you think it's mainly like our environment where we live and what we eat that contributed to how the gut microbes got inside the gut? Or do you think there's a genetic component or something else?
Right. So it's both.
Hmm.
And I think that research has shown that obviously we have a symbiotic relationship with these critters.
Hmm.
They need us, we need them. They break down the food that we eat. And, there's all kinds of different ones that have different functions. So some that break down, and this is very generic, but some that break down vegetables, some that break down bread, some that break down fat, whatever. And their entire purpose is to take the food that we eat, break it down, and then thereby allowing us to be able to absorb those nutrients. So symbiotic relationship. How did they get there? Well, I think it's both environmental and genetic. So we know genetically that there's going to be a certain complement of bacteria that you have, and some of it you pick up even when you're born.
Mhm.
So as you, again, vivid pictures, but as you enter into the world and pass through all the goo, um, there's a whole microbiome down there if you're the mother. And so you pass through it, and the baby picks it up as
Mhm.
he or she is, emerges from the womb. And so, they're doing a lot of research showing now that, if you're born by C-section, or, you never had access to that, you weren't exposed to the vaginal microbiome, you're actually at a kind of at a disadvantage because you didn't get touched by it, and that's how they're covered
Yeah.
with it. So there's genetics, there's birthing, but then there's also the environment for sure, and that
Mhm.
plays a definite role. So, if you're living in a very aseptic environment, you're not playing in the dirt. You're not exposing yourself to these different microbes. Um, you're at a disadvantage again, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's been fascinating. One of the things that we've noticed in our research is many of our partners, our clients who were not born in this country, uh,
Mhm.
actually have more diverse microbiomes because, here in the States, we pride ourselves on our cleanliness, but in many ways, that's actually contraintuitive to wanting to have a healthy microbiome.
Yeah.
you weren't you don't have the opportunity to be exposed to all the different critters that you would be if you were born in a, maybe a,
Mhm.
I don't want to say a not as aseptic environment, but born elsewhere. So,
Mhm.
and they're showing now again allergies, eczema, asthma. These are all things that happen when your body is so used to being clean, and then something happens to perturb it a little, and the immune system goes bonkers, and starts to essentially just overdo it. Autoimmune disease, these are all things that are much more prevalent in first world countries than in third world countries. They just have better microbiomes in
Yeah.
other countries. So, and how do you control that? Well, you know, don't just eat processed foods. Don't eat the same foods. Here you can go to the supermarket and buy the same thing every day, whereas in other countries, you go to a farmer's market and, well, today artichokes aren't available, so you got
Yeah.
to eat something else. Well, that's good because it actually helps your microbiome to become more diverse
Mhm.
because you're helping different species to live and thrive.
Mhm. And I've also heard or read in some articles where for some patients, their gut microbiome is not as diverse, and so they're having to take like fecal transplants from healthy patients and transplant it into unhealthy patients to try to regrow some of their um, microbiome.
Yep, that is happening. One of the challenges with that is that it doesn't always take permanently.
Mhm.
So you might see, and that's to some extent a genetic question, like because your body has to decide that it wants to hold those creatures. Um, I know that's been one of the challenges with fecal transplants, that it's not always permanent.
Mhm. Okay. And what's your opinion on probiotics? Do you know, for example, um, have they identified specific bacteria that if you take these probiotics, they can lead to improvement in strength, or if you take these bacteria, they can improve your gut microbiome, and it could lead to better mental health? Or have they identified specific bacteria that lead to specific health outcomes?
Yeah.
Or yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. We get asked that a lot. And I can, if you're curious, just personally, I'm happy to send you some citations. There have definitely been some studies that correlate specific species of bacteria to specific outcomes, improvements. So, I think it's still on the early side of that, but there is definitely research happening that will say, there are studies done on, Lactobacillus species X that have shown, if baby takes this, in their milk or whatever, that they, are at a less likelihood of chance of getting eczema or these other conditions. And I've seen these studies. So the answer is yes. And so it's actually really important to us. We probiotics are interesting, right? Because people have heard about them. They don't always take them the right way. Now, our take on probiotics is you want to find one that has the most species possible in it, that's not overwhelmingly strong, because you don't want to give any specific species complete dominance over the others, because then you can just create more of a dysbiosis meaning imbalance
Mm-hmm.
gut. So the goal is to put in lots of different things, so you're giving them all kind of an equal chance to survive, all of them having a purpose, which is good, um, rather than just blasting the system with a single strain, at a really high concentration, because now you've given that guy total
Yeah, domination.
over the others. So, there's that. And then definitely there have been some studies that have shown that specific species have value, for some of the things you're talking about. I can send a list if you're curious.
Okay. And you started a company, Ixcela, to investigate kind of what goes on between the gut microbiome and the how it affects your health. And can you talk a little bit more about that? From my understanding, is you take a blood sample and you determine like what kind of metabolites, or what kind of what's in the blood, and then from there you can deduce what kind of diet best fits a person. Is that kind of right?
That is correct. So, there's been a lot of sort of speculation about what does the data from the microbiome really mean. And the majority of microbiome companies are stool sample analysis companies. Um, we take a very different approach,
Mm-hmm.
because, the challenges with, first of all, acquiring a stool sample, um, that has its own
Yeah.
challenge. But more importantly, there's the unpleasantness of it, but there's really the bigger problem is the science. So unless you're collecting the entire stool sample, the challenge with just taking a piece from like a little bit, which is much more consumer friendly, is that it's not an accurate representation of the whole. So depending on where you scoop from,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to get a different result. And we know this because we've tried it. So, I think there's a problem with that. Then the next problem is, well, is what I'm actually looking at in the stool reflective of what is inside me? What is stool? There's a lot of waste, dead cells, uh,
Mm-hmm.
indigestible fibers. So can we say what is in this one little teeny scoop, is this the same as what is inside me? And the answer is it can't be yes. It just can't be. They're different. So there are issues with that sort of method, I think, of collection, and science is still sorting that out. The nice thing about what we do is that we are measuring the output of the gut. So
Mhm.
it's less about, do I have 8 lactobacillus and 80 billion bifidobacillus? It's more about, okay, are the lactobacillus, bifidobacillus, whatever, that are in my gut, are they actually functioning properly? It's not just about what's in there, it's about, is it working?
Mhm.
And because to some extent, you and I could measure our microbiomes, and I might have 10 of something or 10 billion. You might have 2 billion. But if your guys are working better than mine, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter how many we have.
Mhm.
So, and that's where, I read a lot of articles and people are like, well, the microbiome still is unknown and this and that. Well, maybe from the perspective of, do you need 10? Do you need 15 billion? Do you need how many of these and how many of those? But when you're measuring their output, you can get a pretty good sense because you can measure these markers. So the way we started was that our co-founder, who is now in his late 70s,
Mhm.
has been in the space for more than 50 years. So he, throughout the course of his career, has been involved with hundreds of research studies looking at metabolite or small molecule differences between healthy people and unhealthy people. And that spans the gamut from, people who are overweight to people with Alzheimer's disease. What is different in their bloods? What has changed? If you have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's or ALS or diabetes, frankly, heart disease, anxiety, depression, schizophrenia, any of these conditions where we've been part of these studies, and you compare a healthy person to a not healthy person, so someone with the disease to someone without, what has changed throughout the course of that disease? Are there specific risk factors that make that person more likely to get that specific disease? These are all the things that, we've looked at over the last 50 years. And you start to see trends that there are, in fact, certain metabolites, markers, compounds in blood and urine and in these different fluids that do separate the healthy ones from the not so healthy ones. And when we took a step back and we said, gee, that's kind of interesting because the same sets of molecules were repeating each themselves across these different studies. So these 11 markers that we test for in the blood were important across all these different sort of disease states as being, if they're too low or too high, you might be at a higher risk. You might, they're associated with sort of the negative side of potentially getting this disease or being at risk for it. When we took a step back and we said, fascinating, these same 11 things play a role somehow. They're relevant. Where do they come from and why are they important? They were related to the gut microbiome. So when I say that, what do I mean? So some of the molecules are actually produced by certain bacteria in the gut. So you can identify which ones are the positive ones, actually the good ones, spit out some of these molecules. You can measure that to assess, do I have enough of the good ones? Some of the invasive ones spit stuff out as well. You can measure that. So you can say, all right, I have too much of this one thing here that is produced by the invasives. I need to figure out how to lower levels of those in order to allow productivity of the better ones to improve. So you can measure those things. So again, it's the output. It's not about how many there are, but it's about, do I have enough of this? Are they producing enough of these molecules? There are other molecules you can measure that assess the health of the lining. So again, you might be eating the healthiest food imaginable, but if your lining is damaged,
Mhm.
it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So, is my intestine actually able to even absorb any of
Sure.
this?
Yeah.
And some of the cells in there will produce, for example, serotonin. 90% of serotonin is actually produced in the gut. It's important for gut motility, helping things move along. It's important because it prevents the cells of the lining from separating. When
Mhm.
cells in the lining separate, you have this condition called leaky gut. So
Mhm.
it's means that, food particles and other things can potentially squeak through, right? The intestine's supposed to be a tube, but if you have a hole in the tube, now food particles are flowing through into areas of the body where one very important area is called the lamina propria, where your immune system hangs out. So that's why when people, let's say if you're, let's say I love oranges, so I'm eating a lot of oranges. Well, now my intestinal lining is damaged. I have like little pieces of orange that are coming through into the lamina propria. My immune system is attacking it because my immune system doesn't know what an orange is. It's never been produced. After a while, you develop a food sensitivity or allergy to that orange because your immune system thinks it's an invader. Again, you want those cells to be really tightly packed so that you don't end up with leaky gut. So you can measure that. You can measure some of these molecules that play a role in intestinal permeability, we call it. And then you can measure some of the digestive products. So, for example, amino acids, right? So you've had a taco for lunch, and that taco has gone through the system. Your bacteria have broken it down, and your tyrosine, your tryptophan, these amino acids are absorbed. How are my levels? Are they should be? Because if they are, awesome. If they're not, it could be because you're not getting enough of that in your diet, but it can also be because of the damaged intestinal lining, so you're not absorbing properly. So again, it's not just an issue of what is there. It is an issue structurally of, can I even absorb and process this stuff? Or, so I think a lot of the products out there aren't always focused on the right thing, and the data is still not so conclusive. Okay, so they provide you with a list of 200 microbes that they sequenced from your gut, and you look at this and you're like, what does this even mean? Like, is good? Is this bad? Why are you telling me to eat an artichoke? Like, why is it related? Versus, again, in principle, what we're doing is, it's not about that. It's about, is the gut actually producing these molecules that I need to be healthy? Am I able to absorb the food that I'm eating? And then as a result, you can actually make recommendations because if it's a damaged intestine, here are the things you need to go do. Or if it's as simple as eat more meat, eat more meat. Or if you're a vegan or vegetarian, eat more protein from whatever source you want. But that is the fundamental difference, I think, between the different tests, and how with us, it's a pinprick blood test. So you poke your finger, you bleed 30 to 40 microliters of blood on a collection device, you close it up, you send it to us. We look at these 11 markers, and then we provide suggestions. So again, depending on what's wrong, is it dietary? Okay, well, here are the foods you should eat in order to get these nutrients that you're not getting. Or you got a damaged intestine. We got to go fix that. Here are recommendations for things you can do to rectify that problem. Or, hey, you know what? You have all these damage markers because you're stressed out, you're over exercising, you're whatever. We got to deal with that because that's actually affecting your gut. So again, all the markers tell a slightly different story. And so by doing the test, you can customize that client's journey.
Okay. I kind of get a understand. You're looking at the outcomes to kind of determine where, how to combat the issue. For example, if you have low levels of serotonin, you'll figure out like these foods produce give the precursors to produce serotonin.
Correct. Or if the lining is damaged, then you're not going to be producing serotonin. So fix the lining so that the cells can go back to doing their original job, which was producing serotonin. So again, you kind of have to isolate the root of the problem in order to solve it. And the only way to do that, of course, is to measure these molecules and see. I mean, in many ways, people look at us and they say, well, it's a microbiome test that looks at blood. That's really weird. But blood-based testing is kind of like the industry norm. When you go to get a cholesterol test, you don't go and get a DNA test for high cholesterol. You might be able to, they might say to you, well, you might be at risk for high cholesterol. And at the end of the day, you're like, yeah, but do I have high cholesterol or not? I got to go get a blood test to assess that in this moment, do I have this problem?
Yeah.
It's the same for us, which is in this moment, do I have this problem or not?
Yeah.
Rather than speculation, of what might be.
Hmm. And do you have any opinions on specific diets, like the keto diet or the Atkins diet, and how they affect the gut microbiome? Or do you think you should just have a well-balanced diet with green veggies, fruit, meat, you know?
This is a great question, much debated. Uh,
Mhm.
every person is different, and there are sometimes medical reasons for why they make choices about their diets. I want to say that first because there's no way to answer that without somehow offending some group, right?
Mhm.
My problems are this, and thus I should do that. And we get that. So I think we do have lots of people who believe in the keto diet. We have an accommodation in our results. If you want to follow a high fat diet, you can click on a button and it makes the report do that for you. What we would say is I like to defer to research always, which
Mhm.
is, are there studies that show that these things are really effective long term in some specific way? And what we haven't found there to be super strong evidence that being on a keto diet is going to be really good for the microbiome, for example, which is one of the reasons why we don't specifically suggest go
Mhm.
on a keto diet. Um, but there are people who do it medically, and that's their choice. I would say our protocols tend to be more on the well-balanced side. They
Mhm.
are a little bit more protein heavy
Mhm.
than maybe all traditional. We believe in the importance of protein, uh,
Mhm.
mostly because we've seen that a lot of people are really low in
Yeah.
proteins and not getting enough. And especially, frankly, if you're a vegan or vegetarian, it's tough to get enough protein
Mhm.
from plant-based diets. So, but I would say, we tend to provide kind of a well-balanced approach. Yes, we believe in green leafy vegetables. And the way the report is structured, we actually break apart carbs into high and low carbs because to some extent, salad is still a carb.
Yeah.
So, just to encourage people to understand there's a difference between eating potatoes and bread and eating, salads and vegetables, which are still carbohydrate
Yeah.
based. So, again, I like the approach of a little bit of everything. Most
Mhm.
because too, life is short, but it's long. Like if you're going to eat the same food for the next 10 years, imagine having to eat broccoli just every day, day after day. Nobody would do it. It would be the most unsuccessful diet on the face of the planet, despite
Mhm.
the fact that I'm sure it's really, really healthy. So,
Yeah.
um, I think providing this sort of well balanced, and again, when you look at our reports, you'll see there's lots of choice. So when we talk about eating fiber rich foods, there's like 70 choices. So, you might say, well, I don't like jicama root, but I do like, you know, strawberries or whatever.
Mhm.
Great. Um, we're not going to force you to eat jicama root for the rest of your life.
Yeah.